Okay, I want to start off by talking about some of these, one-line statements that I've heard thousands of times as a sedevacantist, and and I've said it. I've said these statements thousands of times without really thinking about too much what they really mean, right? So, I want to take this statement that we attribute to Saint Athanasius. If Catholics faithful to tradition are reduced to a handful, okay, that is the church, right? We have the faith, they have the buildings, right? So, as a sedevacantist, those quotes are music to my ears because that's exactly what I believe, right? We have the true faith, they have the buildings. We're faithful to tradition. We're small, very small in number. We are the church, therefore, right? So yeah, well, I will, as a sedevacantist, I will put a magnifying glass on that quote, and I will blow that up into a very large dogmatic statement. Okay? And the problem I discovered with that was I was actually talking to another Catholic about that, and he made this reply to me. He said, that small group of Catholics faithful to tradition that Saint Athanasius was referring to. He asked me, do you think within that small handful there was a pope or some bishops with ordinary jurisdiction? So, that got me to thinking, right? So, and I realized what I was doing was I was, basically dogmatizing that quote in a way that redefined the Catholic Church, and at the same time completely ignoring the dogmatic definition of the church that we find in the Catechism, right? The church is not the Catholic Church is not the Catholic religion. The Catholic Church is a divine institution established by Christ with these four marks, apostolic succession. That means the church contains the successors of the apostles. These attributes that are permanent qualities to the church: authority, visibility, right? So in other words, the Catholic Church has a hierarchy, okay? So if we're going to refer to the church being those who are faithful to tradition, are we talking about capital T tradition, or are we talking about lower T tradition? Well, I think we're talking about capital T tradition, right? The capital T tradition says the church has authority, the church has a hierarchy, the church has the formal apostolic succession, not just holy orders, but legitimate authority to teach and to govern, right? And the church is the one that contains the successors of the apostles with that same divine authority, okay? And the capital T tradition says that can never fail and that can never cease to exist, okay? So if I'm going to claim to be faithful to tradition, capital T, I have to incorporate within my definition of the church a hierarchy, okay? I can't, in other words, what I found I was doing was I was exaggerating the statement in such a way as I was ignoring and rejecting, actually, the dogmatic definition of the church. And I started to think about that a little bit. And, another Another quote we say in reference to that, is we quote, I believe it was St. Paul, who said, stand fast to the traditions that you've received from us, okay? That gets pointed to as well, right? So what are we doing? Well, we're holding to tradition, right? But I think there was a failure for me, and I think there's a failure in the movement in general, the Sedevacantisim movement in general, to confuse small t tradition with capital T, right? So when St. Paul said, stand fast to tradition, was he referring to small t tradition? Okay, how many candles we're going to light during Mass? Or some of these other, disciplinary things? Or is he talking about the deposit of faith, right? Well, I think he was talking about the deposit of faith, okay? Scripture and tradition, capital T tradition, okay? So if I began to think about a precedent for my position in tradition, I don't find it anywhere. I don't find in the capital T tradition of the church, in the 2,000-year history of the church, a time where the mark of being a Catholic was separation from the hierarchy. I don't find that anywhere. What I found instead is that is the tradition of schism. I found that everyone who has done that has been shown to be schismatic, okay, or heretics. I do find a precedent for my thinking and the way I was viewing the church. I do find precedent for that, but I don't find it in Catholic tradition. What I find that all of these people who have done that, they all have the same idea that the church was and is true, invalid and legitimate, okay, up to a certain point where it got corrupted by evil men, right? So then it befell upon them to preserve the integrity of the true religion. And so they separated from this corrupt church that was once true, and they are the preservers of the authentic Christianity, right? So I found that to be the case with the Donatists. That was the same claim they made. The church got corrupted. The church is full of sinners. We are the pure church, right? And then, of course, we have the Orthodox. What I found also is there was a lot. There was a lot of schisms in the church, a lot of them. Most of them were very small and insignificant. And most of them, from what I understand, kind of died out, over the course of maybe 100 years or so. They didn't really take on too big of a following. But the whole idea behind it is, the church is good and true, got corrupted, and therefore the church is with us now, right? Well, that's the exact same thing I think as a Sedevacantists. The church was good, true, and wonderful up till 1958. Evil men got into the church, corrupted it, turned it into a false church. So it befalls upon me now to leave that church and hold to the authentic Catholic religion, which I can point to from, say, day one, 33 AD to 1958, right? It's the same idea. It's just a different time. It's a different time frame. Another thing I found with this idea of tradition is I found a similarity with. This is probably going to sound offensive, and I don't really mean it to be, but I think it's a legitimate point. Okay, so I hope you can hear this out without getting offended. Okay, I think we can all pretty much agree that today, one of the tactics that liberals use is to control language, redefine terms, right? Put labels, and within this language, it is actually a statement, right? So, for example, we would point to those who advocate for abortion as being, pro-abortion, right? Well, they won't say they're pro-abortion. They're pro-choice. You see, and those of us who recognize the tremendous evil of abortion and seek to get rid of it, right? What do we call ourselves? We call ourselves pro-life, right? Because that's what our position is. It's for life, right? But what do they call us? They call us anti-choice. You see, so there's the control of the language there. And you can see it on the news when we watch CNN. They're talking about the abortion issue. They will point to anti-choice people, right? And then they're going to point to the pro-choice people. So it's about choice, right? And that's just one example. I mean, I could sit here and do 1,000 of them, but I just want to illustrate this point, okay? And I found another group that did this to control language, okay? The old Catholics, right? So they refer to themselves as old Catholics, okay? Within that term implies that they are the same Catholics that we find prior to Vatican I. They're Catholics just like those people. They're old Catholics, right? As opposed to new Catholics. Okay? So there's an attempt to control language there, because within that label, old Catholics, it is implied that they are the authentic Catholics, right, prior to Vatican I, as opposed to the new Catholics, see? So I'm looking at myself, calling myself a traditional Catholic, right? Am I doing the same thing? Well, I can't call myself an old Catholic because that's already been taken, right? So I'm going to call myself a traditional Catholic as opposed to the new Catholics. No, that category has already been taken by the old Catholics, right? We don't want to be like them because they're schismatics, but as opposed to the modern Catholics, right? So we are traditional Catholics, they are modern Catholics. Within those terms is an attempt to control language, right? And then it goes from we're traditional Catholics to we're not going to call them modern Catholics. We're going to go ahead and add an ist to that, right? So they're modernist, or they're modernist Catholics. And we're going to go ahead and throw an ist on our side. We're traditionalists now, right? We're traditionalist as opposed to the modernists, okay? And I've seen that evolution of language. When I came into Sedevacantism 20 years ago, nobody called themselves traditionalists. We just referred to ourselves as traditional Catholics, okay? And I remember the first time I heard that term, it was on like one of these discussion groups where we all get together and discuss things. And somebody came on there and referred to us as the traditionalists, right? And you know what I remember? I remember a bunch of Sedevacantists saying, don't call us that. We're not an ist. You know, we're not the traditionalists. You know, like they were offended by that, right? Um, and then I noticed, you know, as the years went by, we started to adopt that term for ourselves. You know, we're the traditionalists, right? So now we don't have traditional Catholics versus modern Catholics. We now have traditionalists versus the modernists, right? Um, so I mean that's not an argument against Sedevacantism, but it is to show there's a mindset here. I mean, there are arguments against Sedevacantism, but again, that's not the point of this. I'm trying to expose kind of some faults in the way we're, you know, specifically my thinking was, right? So if I'm going to call myself a traditional Catholic, what am I referring to here? Am I referring to small t tradition? Or am I referring to capital T tradition? If I'm going to call myself a traditional Catholic, capital T, I got to belong to a church that has authority. I have to belong to a church that has a hierarchy, that has the legitimate successors of the apostles with the authority to teach and to govern the church. Okay?